Some hands are meant to build, some are meant to protect, and some, like mine, have spent 71 years simply trying to hold things together. My name is Margaret, and at my age, you learn that the world doesn't break all at once, it cracks slowly, in the quiet corners of rooms you thought were safe. For months, the only sound keeping the silence of my widowhood at bay was the rhythmic, comforting click of my aluminum knitting needles. I was weaving a tapestry of prayers, memories, and soft pink yarn into a baby blanket for my son Ethan's firstborn child. It was supposed to be a bridge across a widening gap. But when I saw that blanket, the one I had poured my failing eyesight and arthritic aches into, sitting at the very top of the greasy wheelie bin outside their house, something tore inside me that no needle could ever mend. Ethan is 32 now, a man with his father's gentle eyes but a strange, hesitant posture that he only developed after marrying Chloe. I remember when he was just a boy, how he would press his face into my apron when he was frightened, seeking the scent of lavender and flower. Now, he looked at me through a lens of constant, nervous apology. Chloe was a woman of sharp angles and minimalist aesthetics. To her, everything old was clutter, and everything emotional was a liability. The day they brought my granddaughter, Lily, home from the hospital, I arrived with the blanket. It wasn't just yarn. Inside the silk lining, hidden beneath the delicate satin border, I had sewn the only inheritance I had left to give, something that had survived generations. "Oh, it's colorful, Margaret," Chloe had said that afternoon, her voice flat, barely touching the fabric with the tip of her manicured finger. She didn't offer me tea. She didn't ask me to sit. She just placed the blanket on the edge of the pristine, gray kitchen island, right next to a stack of modern, store-bought organic muslin wraps. I left their house early that day, the cold autumn wind biting at my cheeks. But it wasn't until that evening, when I walked past their driveway to drop off a pot of homemade chicken broth, that I saw it. The lid of the trash can was slightly open. Peeking out from beneath a discarded takeout container was a flash of that unmistakable, soft blush pink wool. My breath caught in my throat. The world went perfectly still, save for the distant hum of traffic. I stepped closer, my old knees trembling, and pulled the blanket from the filth. Chloe hadn't just thrown it away, she had sliced the satin edging with scissors, likely looking to see if the weight of it contained something else, or perhaps just ensuring it could never be gifted back. They didn't know. They hadn't looked deep enough into the hidden pocket I had stitched into the core. I took the ruined blanket home, washed it in silence, and waited. I didn't call. I didn't scold. I knew the weight of what was missing would find them eventually. And it did. At exactly 2:14 a.m., my phone blared into the darkness of my bedroom. When I answered, there was no greeting. There was only the sound of my grown son, sobbing so violently he could barely draw breath. "Mom." Ethan choked out, his voice terrified, stripped of all adult pretense. "Mom, please tell me you still have it." Chloe threw the blanket away, and the garbage truck already came. "Mom, what was inside it? Please tell me you took it back." "I have it, Ethan," I said quietly, the weight of the old landline heavy in my hand. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't let the anger that had been simmering in my chest spill into the receiver. I pulled it out of the trash before the rain started. On the other end of the line, I heard a sharp, ragged intake of breath. It wasn't Ethan. It was Chloe. She had been hovering over his shoulder, listening. I could hear her frantic whispering in the background, her sharp, demanding tone muffled by a hand placed over the mouthpiece. "Mom," Ethan stammered, his voice shaking. We need to come over. Now. Please." "It's nearly 3 in the morning, Ethan," I replied, looking out my kitchen window at the dark, empty street. "The blanket is clean. It's safe in my cedar chest. Go to sleep. We will talk about what was inside it tomorrow." I hung up before he could argue. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my old rocking chair, the one your father bought me when we were expecting Ethan. I looked around my living room. It wasn't minimalist like Chloe's house. My walls were crowded with framed photographs, the surfaces covered with lace doilies I'd crocheted over decades. To Chloe, this room was a graveyard of useless things. But to me, every object held a heartbeat. The next morning, the sun hadn't even cleared the oak trees before Ethan's car pulled into my driveway. I watched through the lace curtains as they got out. Ethan looked hollowed out, dark circles bruising the skin under his eyes. Chloe walked a few paces behind him, her usual rigid, confident posture replaced by a tense, hurried stride. She wasn't wearing her designer coat, she had thrown a mismatched cardigan over her shoulders, her hair hastily tied back. When I opened the door, the smell of fresh coffee and old wood filled the air. Ethan didn't even wait for me to step aside. He stumbled into the hallway. "Where is it, Mom?" he asked, his hands twitching at his sides. "Good morning to you too, Ethan." "Hello, Chloe," I said, keeping my voice as calm and steady as a Sunday morning. I walked into the living room and sat down on the sofa, smoothing my skirt. Chloe stepped forward, her eyes darting around the room until they landed on the wooden chest in the corner. "Margaret, please," she said, her voice tight, trying desperately to maintain her usual polite, superior veneer. "We made a mistake." I was overwhelmed with the baby, and the blanket looked so old-fashioned. "I didn't think." Ethan said his grandfather gave him something before he passed, and that it was supposed to be passed down to Lily. "Is it in the blanket?" I looked at Chloe. Really looked at her. For 2 years, she had treated me like an inconvenient ghost from Ethan's past. She had restricted my visits with my granddaughter, critiqued my cooking, and made it clear that my old-fashioned ways had no place in her modern life. "Sit down, Chloe," I said softly. She hesitated, looking at the worn fabric of my armchair as if it might stain her, but the sheer desperation in her eyes forced her to sit. Ethan sank onto the footstool at my knees, just like he used to when he was a little boy who had scraped his elbow. "You sliced the satin border, Chloe," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "You didn't just throw it away. You cut it. What were you looking for?" Chloe's face flushed a deep, burning crimson. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. "I know what you thought," I continued, looking between the two of them. "You thought your father-in-law left behind money. You knew he was an antique dealer, and you've been searching for his private ledger for a year. You thought I hid the safety deposit keys or the gold certificates in the lining of that blanket, didn't you?" Ethan looked up at his wife, his eyes wide with a sudden, horrible realization. "Chloe, you told me it fell behind the changing table. You told me it got ruined by the diaper bin. Did you cut it open looking for money?" Chloe's silence was the loudest sound in the room. She stared at her lap, her fingers twisting the hem of her cardigan, refusing to meet my gaze or Ethan's. The illusion of her perfect, controlled life was fracturing right before our eyes. "Ethan," Chloe finally whispered, her voice cracking, "we have so many debts from the new house. The mortgage, the landscaping. I thought if your father had left something substantial, it was rightfully ours. Your mother doesn't need it. She lives so simply." Ethan stood up, stepping away from her as if she were a stranger. "You searched through my mother's handmade gift for gold? You threw it in the trash when you didn't find a key?" He turned back to me, his voice cracking. "Mom, what was inside it? If it wasn't money, why did Dad make me swear to ask you about the pink blanket when Lily was born?" I stood up slowly, walked over to the cedar chest, and lifted the heavy lid. The scent of dried lavender filled the room. I pulled out the blush-pink blanket. It was freshly washed, but the long, jagged cut Chloe had made along the satin border hung open like a wound. "Your father didn't leave behind gold certificates, Chloe," I said, sitting back down and placing the blanket on my lap. "He left behind something far more valuable, and far more fragile." I reached my hand deep into the slit Chloe had cut. Past the wool, nestled in a hidden, waterproof velvet pouch sewn into the very core of the batting, I pulled out a thick, weathered leather ledger. Chloe's eyes lit up for a fraction of a second, the hunger for financial salvation still lingering in her expression. But as I opened the book, her face went entirely pale. "This isn't a bank ledger," I said softly, turning the yellowed pages. "This is a record of lineage. For 40 years, your father traced our family's history back to the old country. But more importantly, Ethan, do you remember your older sister, Clara? Ethan blinked, stunned. Clara? She passed away in the hospital when I was 2. You told me she was born with a weak heart. She was, I whispered, a tear finally escaping my eye and sliding down the wrinkles of my cheek. But before she died, she lived for 3 months. And during those 3 months, she lay underneath this exact pink blanket. Your father couldn't bear to part with it, so we kept it safely stored. When she passed, we found out that Clara wasn't biologically your father's. Ethan froze. Chloe looked up, her breath catching. I was married before, Ethan, I confessed, looking deeply into my son's eyes. To a man who was cruel, a man who abandoned me the moment I became pregnant. Your father met me when I was broken, carrying another man's dying child. He loved Clara as his own. He wrapped her in this blanket, paid her hospital bills, and buried her with his own name. In this ledger, he wrote down the truth of his love, a legal adoption decree, his private journals about what it truly means to be a father, and the deed to a small plot of land he bought in Clara's name, which has since been absorbed by the city's commercial district. I closed the book with a soft thud. That land was rezoned last year, Chloe. The city offered to buy it out to build a new medical center. The compensation is worth nearly $500,000. Your father wanted it to go to Ethan's first child, but only on one condition written right here in his will: the child must be raised by a family that understands the value of unconditional love, heritage, and respect for the past. I looked at the sliced satin of the blanket. You were looking for a shortcut to wealth, Chloe. But by throwing away the old, cluttered blanket because it didn't fit your modern aesthetic, you threw away the very proof of ownership. The city requires the original deed and the physical ledger to release the funds to the legal heirs. If I hadn't pulled this out of the trash, the land would have defaulted to the state by the end of this month. Chloe sat frozen, her mouth slightly open, the color completely drained from her skin. The $500,000 she had so desperately sought to fix her modern, fragile life had been sitting in her own kitchen, wrapped in the very wool she deemed too ugly to exist in her home. Margaret, she stammered, reaching a trembling hand toward the ledger on my lap. I didn't know. If I had known what it meant, I would never. That is exactly the problem, Chloe, I interrupted, my voice dropping to a calm, icy whisper that commanded the entire room. You only value what carries a price tag. You don't value the hands that made it, the history that carried it, or the love that preserved it. You cut this blanket open out of greed, and when you found nothing but wool, you discarded it. You cannot love a family only when it is convenient or profitable. Ethan looked at his wife, and for the first time in years, the fog of submission cleared from his eyes. He saw her clearly. The silence between them was deafening. He didn't yell. He didn't scream. He simply stood up, walked to the front door, and opened it wide, letting the crisp morning air flood the hallway. Go home, Chloe, Ethan said, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. Go back to the empty, perfect house you wanted. I am staying here with my mother. And tomorrow, we are going to a lawyer to make sure Lily's trust is completely protected from you. Chloe looked at Ethan, then at me, realizing she had lost everything, her dignity, her husband's respect, and the fortune she had tried to steal. Without a word, she grabbed her cardigan, kept her head down, and walked out into the cold morning light. When the door clicked shut, the heavy silence of the house returned, but the tension was gone. Ethan came back into the living room, sank to his knees beside my chair, and buried his face into the ruined pink blanket, weeping the tears of a boy who had finally found his way back home. I placed my old, spotted hand on his head, stroking his hair just like I used to. Over the next few months, justice dismantled the wall Chloe had built around our family. The city approved the transfer of the land funds directly into a locked educational trust for my granddaughter, Lily. Ethan moved into a quiet townhouse just down the street from me, and every Sunday, the sound of baby laughter filled my living room once again. I took out my aluminum needles, bought a fresh spool of silk satin ribbon, and carefully, stitch by stitch, I repaired the pink blanket. Some things break, yes. But with enough patience, the right thread, and a little bit of truth, they can be made whole again. My friends, life has a strange way of stripping away the things we don't appreciate until we are left standing in the bare, cold truth of our choices. Chloe wanted a life of perfect, modern surfaces, but she forgot that a house built only on appearance has no foundation to hold it up when the storms arrive. Sometimes, people mistake a quiet spirit for weakness. They think that because we hold on to the old ways, we don't see the world changing around us. But true strength doesn't scream, and it doesn't destroy. It simply outlasts the noise. I look at Lily now, wrapped tightly in that repaired pink blanket, and I know that her future is secure, not just because of the money her grandfather left behind, but because she will grow up knowing exactly where she came from. Here at Revenge Dismantled, we believe that the best way to answer an injustice isn't with anger, but with the quiet dignity of the truth. Tell me, my dear friends, would you have found it in your heart to forgive Chloe, or would you have cut ties completely to protect your family's peace? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please leave a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and remember to cherish the hands that hold your history.